Galactic Command's war room echoed with laughter, polished boots tapping against polished marble as officers leaned back in their chairs and waved dismissive hands at the central holodisplay. The display showed a single inbound vessel from Earth, old and battered, limping through space without an escort. The commanding officer, a hulking creature with thick ridges running down his skull, snorted and said what they were all thinking: Earth had sent a single man. No fleet. No armada. No battalion. One man. The laughter grew louder, a few officers betting drinks on how long this poor soul would last once he landed. But while they laughed, the comms officer frowned, confused, leaning closer to his panel. Something was wrong. No ID codes. No diplomatic credentials. Only a short transmission from Earth's Council itself, crisp and unyielding: asset inbound. Clearance, none. Down on the planet's surface, the landing zone teams prepared themselves casually, cleaning weapons lazily, bored already by what promised to be a short show. Officers joked that maybe the Earthman would crawl out of his pod waving a white flag, or perhaps they could make a game of it, letting him run before they hunted him down. They had no concept that history was about to pivot on this moment. When the shuttle finally appeared in the upper atmosphere, it didn't slow down. It streaked through the sky trailing smoke and plasma, roaring like a meteor. The landing pads scrambled their guns, but too late. The shuttle slammed into the edge of the pad at a brutal angle, scattering debris and flame. For a heartbeat there was silence as everyone stared at the wreckage. Then a hiss of escaping gas, a clang of metal, and from the ruined craft emerged a single figure. He stepped out slowly, one hand resting on his hip, wearing what seemed to the galactic officers like outdated, primitive body armor, patched and scorched. He was a human male, older than expected, gray streaking through his beard, a long scar cutting across his jaw and disappearing beneath his collar. He carried no weapon openly. He didn't raise his hands in surrender. He simply surveyed the scene like a man who had seen far worse and was unimpressed. The closest galactic sergeant stepped forward and barked in amusement, demanding identification and surrender. The man didn't answer. He simply walked forward through the wreckage with a limp that was too steady, too deliberate. And then, without breaking stride, he spoke. 5 simple words that chilled the soldiers far more than any weapon: I am the end here. The situation shifted from comedy to confusion. Officers shouted orders, weapons came up, security drones swarmed, but by then the man was gone. The holophides watched him walk and then, inexplicably, disappear behind a column of smoke that hadn't been there a moment before. Minutes passed. The patrol commander sent in a squad. They never returned. Galactic Command on orbit received garbled transmissions that ended mid-word. The commander who had bet drinks laughed again, but this time it was forced, uneasy. He ordered an air recon sweep. The sweep found nothing except smoldering patrol vehicles. No trace of life. Inside the war room, a junior officer hesitantly pulled up records on this unexpected visitor. Earth had refused to submit identification, but the intelligence database auto-flagged a match. Only one image, decades old, heavily redacted, codename Ghost. No military rank listed. No decorations. No deployments officially logged. Just a brief, almost sardonic file note: retired. Asset inactive. Clearance above priority. Dangerous. The laughter stopped completely as this file scrolled across the display. The room chilled. Even among hardened galactic tacticians, the name Ghost was a shadowy rumor, a name muttered in speculation about human covert operations, never confirmed, always dismissed as legend. As panic began creeping into the edges of their confidence, the officers realized they had no contact with any surface outpost near the landing zone anymore. No reports. No telemetry. Even the automated gun arrays had gone dark. This wasn't a soldier who had landed. It was something far worse. And still, there was no sign of him on sensors. Just one wrecked shuttle and a spreading communications blackout moving outward from the crash site like a spreading stain. The galactic general presiding over this invasion, General Hulk, slammed his fists onto the table and roared that this was psychological warfare. He ordered his officers to send a full platoon to the landing site to clean up the mess, but as they obeyed, the lights in the war room flickered. Static crackled across the holodisplays. For a moment, every screen showed only one image: the human standing at the edge of the landing zone, staring directly at the camera, utterly still, as if he could see through the lenses and into the eyes of every officer watching him. The image froze there as a quiet voice spoke through the speakers: "I am here already." The lights died. The officers shouted over one another. Security alarms blared. When the lights flickered back, a single knife was embedded into the general's chair, where he had been sitting seconds before. A small knife, old and worn, but clearly thrown from some impossible range. Attached to the knife was a scrap of paper, almost laughably primitive, a handwritten note in perfect galactic script: "One man is enough." Far below, on the darkened surface of the planet, the retired killer moved through the ruins of the landing zone like a ghost indeed, silent and unseen. The soldiers searching for him stumbled into their own fears, seeing shadows and imagining threats where there were none. But the real threat moved ahead of them always, laying traps, cutting off escape routes, and dismantling their equipment. The human was not in a rush. He was not panicked. He worked with a deliberate calm, as though this mission was not war but craft. The first chapter closes with a grim realization dawning over the Galactic command officers, a fear that chilled their blood. Earth had not underestimated them at all. They had simply calculated exactly what was required to end this entire campaign. And all it took was one man. The patrol squads moved quickly through the darkened valley near the ruined landing zone, but their speed came with the sweat of unease. They had stopped laughing. The jokes about Earth's lone soldier had dried up completely, replaced with whispers and wide-eyed glances toward every shadow. The briefing had made it sound like an easy task. Intercept. Detain. Deliver him back for public interrogation. Instead, there was silence on every channel except for faint static, and when static was the only sound left on a battlefield, even hardened galactic troopers felt the instinctual dread rise in their throats. They worked by the book, scanning thermals, pulse readings, and radar overlays, but none of it mattered. This was not a fight they were trained for, not against this kind of enemy. In the middle of it all, Ghost crouched atop a ridgeline, watching them with a patience that seemed almost cruel. He was older now, slower in some ways than he had once been, but his experience more than compensated for what time had taken from his body. Every step the patrol squads took was within a trap he had already envisioned. He studied their movements like a predator, not rushing, just waiting for the right moment. His armor was scarred, patched from 100 forgotten conflicts, and his knife was the same simple tool he had carried for decades. He didn't need a gun yet. When he did, there would be plenty lying around. Below him, the Galactic squads paused at a cluster of burned-out vehicles. The wreckage seemed fresh, smoke still curling lazily from the tires. A sergeant stepped forward and called for a scan, sweeping the area, trying to look professional even as the fear clung to his voice. A private nudged the sergeant nervously and pointed at something resting in the ashes: a helmet. Human issue. Blood smeared across the visor. It looked fresh. Too fresh. The sergeant leaned forward to inspect it, and that was the instant Ghost moved. A silent shape dropped from the ridge behind them, and by the time anyone turned, the sergeant's body was already crumpling to the ground, throat cleanly cut, not a sound escaping his lips. Ghost didn't pause. His movements were not frantic but methodical, a shadow flowing between soldiers as they realized, too late, that they were under attack. The first scream was cut short, followed by the dull snap of a neck breaking. By the time blasters fired, they were aiming at empty air. The smoke from the wreckage wasn't just debris. Ghost had seeded the entire area with a chemical fog, blinding their visors, distorting their sensors, and scrambling communications. In orbit above, General Hulk watched the feeds with mounting rage. His face was tight with fury, but behind his rage was something worse: confusion. How could this be happening? How could one old human dismantle entire patrols in minutes? How could he avoid sensors and destroy machines that should have outmatched him? His advisors hovered nervously nearby, too afraid to speak, afraid even to move. Hulk slammed his fist down and barked for more reinforcements. He demanded elite bounty squads be dispatched immediately. But in the back of his mind, a thought nagged at him, one he could not shake. Earth had planned this. They had calculated exactly how much effort would be required to break Galactic Command's arrogance, and they had sent it in the form of this one man. Down below, Ghost worked quickly, stripping weapons from fallen soldiers, disabling their transports, and leaving only destruction in his wake. He never lingered. He never looked back. He didn't need to. Everything he did was by design. This was not random sabotage. This was a campaign. A pattern. And Galactic Command, in their arrogance, could not see it. Even as they dispatched more troops, even as they scrambled more drones, they were playing into his hands. Every soldier they sent to the surface was one more piece he could remove from their game. At one ruined outpost, Ghost paused. He crouched next to a broken console and tapped into their network calmly, bypassing the most advanced security systems with ease. It was almost funny. These systems were designed to withstand digital assaults from enemy fleets, but not from a man who had spent decades studying them. The irony was sharp and satisfying. He extracted tactical maps, troop deployment logs, and communications records, all while the outpost commander's corpse lay cooling nearby, his eyes wide in disbelief at how fast it had all happened. Ghost moved again, silent and unseen, and as he went, he left subtle signs behind. He wanted them to know it was him. He wanted them to understand they were not hunting him. He was hunting them. He marked ruined vehicles with a single scratch, carved his old codename into walls, left spent knife sheaths where they would be found easily. Each sign was deliberate, a psychological needle pushed deep into the minds of the Galactic officers scrambling to contain the situation. Inside the Galactic War Room, a desperate junior officer brought new intelligence to Hulk's table. They had decrypted fragments of a data burst from one of the outposts before it went silent. It included a brief, chilling phrase, "He was already here before we arrived." Hulk froze, and for a moment, it seemed as if all sound in the room stopped. His hands tightened into fists as he stared at the words. How? How could a man arrive before them? How could he predict their movements so perfectly? Hulk's mind raced, but he found no answers. All he found was the slow, creeping realization that this was no ordinary man, no ordinary mission. Back in the valley, Ghost set his sights on his next objective. A communications relay tower loomed in the distance, lights blinking softly as it fed data back to the orbital fleet. Ghost moved with precision, weaving through shadows and broken ground, planting charges in exactly the right places. He didn't need overwhelming force. He needed precision. When he triggered the charges, the tower didn't explode in a spectacular blast. Instead, it simply died. The lights winked out. The uplink severed. Another piece of Galactic Command's superiority fell away. As darkness reclaimed the valley, the Galactic soldiers who survived began to panic in earnest. They huddled together, scanning the shadows desperately, knowing he was out there but never knowing where. Their superior weapons, their advanced sensors, their numbers meant nothing. All their advantages melted away under the weight of their fear. Ghost watched them from the darkness, calm and steady, and allowed himself a small smile. They would learn tonight what Earth already knew. One man was enough when that man was prepared, when that man was patient, and when that man was Ghost. General Hulk stood rigid at the center of the war room as more red markers blinked across the tactical display, each one signifying another outpost lost, another patrol silenced, another squad vanished without trace. His voice was sharp and cold, cutting through the chaos, barking orders to deploy bounty squads, deploy hunters, deploy anything that could find this human before their entire presence on the planet unraveled. His advisors obeyed, but there was no confidence in their eyes anymore. The mood that had begun with laughter and mockery was now poisoned by confusion and fear. They had no enemy profile to match. They had no counter-strategy. The planet below was slipping out of their grasp, piece by piece, and all of it at the hands of one man. As Hulk studied the display, one of the junior officers hesitated, pointing out a disturbing trend. The losses weren't random. They formed a pattern, a spiral tightening inward, all converging on the planetary forward base where Hulk's ground forces command center sat. On the surface, Ghost moved through the trees with the same careful patience that had defined his career. His path was meticulous. He left false trails behind, disabling drones before they could relay his position. He moved so precisely that even motion sensors failed to catch a single glimpse of him. The Galactic bounty squads deployed were no amateurs. Many had earned their reputations hunting dangerous fugitives across entire star systems. They were armed with the best equipment credits could buy, armor that resisted blaster fire, helmets wired into satellite networks, and rifles that could target a heartbeat from a kilometer away. None of it mattered. Ghost hunted them without hesitation, taking advantage of every flaw in their arrogance. He watched their patrol routes, learned their habits, then struck only when their confidence peaked. A bounty team tracking him through a ravine found themselves boxed in by falling debris Ghost had loosened hours earlier. He didn't fire a shot. He waited at the top of the ridge as they panicked, crushed by their own surroundings. Another team who thought they had cornered him in a narrow canyon suddenly found their weapons jammed, sensors blinded by an electromagnetic spike Ghost had planted in a small device half buried in the ground days earlier. Back in the forward base, officers snapped at each other, their tempers fraying as conflicting reports poured in. A signal here. A thermal spike there. None of it coherent. General Hulk ordered overlapping sweeps of every approach path, tripling security, locking down communications. But the one thing no one noticed was that their external security feeds were slowly being hijacked. As soldiers checked perimeter cameras, the feeds seemed normal, but hidden in plain sight was Ghost's signal splicing. He was inside their network now, not just outside their walls. He watched them as they searched for him. Every time an order was issued, he heard it. Every route marked secure, he saw it. He moved accordingly, invisible and inevitable. Inside the command center's main hall, an argument broke out between two senior officers. One demanded orbital bombardment to clear the entire valley, another insisted that the loss of infrastructure would be too severe, and that this was still just a human problem that could be contained. Their shouting match ended abruptly when the lights dimmed and the entire room fell silent, a chill crawling over every skin. The holodisplay on the far wall flickered, then resolved into a single image, Ghost's face, calm, scarred, eyes steady and unafraid. He said nothing. He didn't need to. The message was clear. He was watching them even now. Hulk's rage reached a boiling point. He authorized the use of assault drones, flooding the sky with lethal machines programmed to kill anything organic on sight. The sky above the forward base swarmed with them, but Ghost was already moving. He had calculated this response before he even landed. His traps weren't just set for soldiers. He had prepared for the machines too. As the drones swept outward in perfect formation, they passed over a ridge dotted with old mining equipment. Equipment Ghost had quietly repurposed, rigging power cells together to generate a localized electromagnetic pulse far stronger than anything the Galactic engineers had predicted a human could build with scrap. The pulse triggered just as the drones reached their optimal range. In an instant, hundreds of machines fell from the sky, crashing into rocks and dirt, their circuits fried. The noise was deafening, but Ghost was already gone, slipping into the chaos he had just created. The bounty squads lost their nerve completely. Some fired wildly into the trees. Others fell back toward the base, abandoning their posts. The spiral of collapse tightened further. The forward base, once the proud nerve center of the planetary occupation, was now under siege from within, even though no formal army had ever appeared. Ghost didn't fight like a soldier. He fought like a shadow, a force that existed before the Galactic officers even realized he was near. In the shadows of the ruined communications tower, he found a lone scout trembling, crouched behind a rock, whispering into a damaged radio. Ghost approached silently, crouched beside him, and spoke softly, almost kindly. "Tell your general I will be there before sunrise." The scout froze, paralyzed with terror. Ghost melted back into the night before the scout could even think to fire. In orbit, Hulk listened to the trembling report from that lone scout and his fury curdled into dread. Even from high above, he felt the tightening grip of inevitability. This was no longer a skirmish. It was a dismantling. A campaign of precision designed to break them not through overwhelming firepower, but through the slow stripping away of every layer of their strength, every assumption, every confidence they had held. The reports from the surface were now almost superstitious in tone, soldiers whispering that Ghost couldn't be seen until he wanted to be seen, that he could appear anywhere, that he had sabotaged the planet itself. And though Hulk raged against the stupidity of such rumors, a cold voice in the back of his mind wondered if they were right. On the ground, Ghost paused beneath a canopy of burned trees, surveying his path forward. The forward base was close now, its walls rising against the horizon, its lights flickering as power failures rolled through the grid. He smiled, a small grim smile of a man who had seen this all before, who had written the playbook long before these young soldiers had even learned to carry a weapon. He was not reckless. He was not panicked. He was precise. Every step, every trap, every kill was part of a design they could not see yet. They would see it soon enough. They would see it when he walked through their walls as if they did not exist. The spiral was closing and Ghost was at its center, exactly where he intended to be. The wind howled through the narrow canyons surrounding the forward base as the first shadows of dawn crept along the jagged ridgelines. The Galactic soldiers stationed there huddled behind sandbagged barricades and armored walls, their eyes wide with exhaustion and fear, their nerves shattered by a night of vanishing comrades, silent deaths, and inexplicable failures of their once unbreakable systems. No one laughed anymore. No one even spoke unless absolutely necessary. Each man and woman clutched their weapon tighter than they had in any previous campaign, but deep down they all shared the same sickening realization. These weapons would not save them. Their numbers would not protect them. Their fortifications would not hold. Inside the command room, General Hulk paced furiously as officers scrambled to compile reports that were now hours out of date and riddled with gaps. Entire drone swarms had vanished from the board. Bounty squads had stopped reporting altogether. Sensor towers were offline. Ghost had cut every advantage the Galactic force possessed, isolating them step by step, turning their overwhelming superiority into impotence. Hulk's aides muttered in urgent whispers, casting anxious glances at the massive tactical display as more red sectors blinked dark, one after another. The spiral was complete now. It all led here, to this base, and they all knew it. The soldiers outside knew it too. Some had abandoned their posts under cover of darkness, deserting before dawn, convinced that their very lives depended on escaping this place before he arrived. Yet despite all the fear in the air, the base itself still looked formidable. It bristled with automated turrets, electrified fences, armored gates, and overlapping fields of fire. Every approach had been reinforced. Hulk had issued a standing order to fire on sight. His face was a mask of rage, but beneath that fury lay something far more dangerous: desperation. He had staked his entire campaign, his reputation, his future within Galactic Command on the conquest of this planet. And now, a single old human had brought it all to the brink of collapse. He refused to flee, refused to evacuate, because to do so would be to admit that he had lost to one man. Ghost watched it all from the darkened tree-line to the east, his mind quiet, patient, methodical. He could feel their fear even from this distance. He had seen this before on countless worlds, in countless campaigns, though none of those had been as personal as this one. This was not just a mission for him. It was unfinished business. Hulk himself was his target, though Hulk did not yet understand why. Many years earlier, in the shadows of a forgotten war, Hulk's decisions had cost lives that Ghost could never forget, could never forgive. Today was the reckoning, and every trap, every ambush, every shattered patrol had been a step toward this final moment. The forward base came alive with noise as the first squad spotted a disturbance along the perimeter fence, a subtle flicker in one of the outermost motion sensors. Soldiers scrambled into position, guns raised, eyes scanning desperately for any sign of movement. They found nothing. The disturbance repeated itself 10 minutes later on the opposite side of the base. Again, they scrambled, again nothing. Ghost was testing them, probing their defenses, fraying their nerves further, forcing them to burn through their limited energy and stamina. Hulk shouted orders over the comms, demanding that his troops hold steady, that they not give in to panic, but his voice carried none of the confidence it had hours earlier. Then it happened. The main gate's control panel shorted out in a shower of sparks. An engineer rushed to reset it only to freeze when he realized that the panel itself had been tampered with long before he ever arrived for inspection. Ghost had already been here. The realization swept through the defenders like a cold wind. Soldiers began shooting wildly at shadows. Panic spread rapidly, discipline breaking down completely. Hulk's voice crackled over the comms, ordering them to hold formation, but his orders no longer mattered. Ghost had already won this battle in their minds. He chose that moment to strike. In the confusion, he breached the perimeter at a blind spot he himself had created 2 days before. No one noticed until it was far too late. Ghost moved swiftly through the outer compound, silent and invisible, leaving chaos in his wake. He planted charges at key junctions, disrupted their power grid, disabled their remaining sensor nodes. Lights flickered and died. Communications broke apart into static and silence. One by one, sections of the base fell into total darkness. Soldiers fired blindly, convinced that any shadow might conceal him, but Ghost was already gone, moving closer to his final objective. Inside the command room, Hulk's advisors begged him to evacuate, to retreat to orbit, to live to fight another day, but Hulk refused. His pride, his fury, his desperation all fused into one decision. He would stay. He would kill this human himself if necessary. He drew his own weapon, a ceremonial plasma sidearm more decorative than practical, and took up position in the center of the command center, waiting, daring Ghost to come for him. Ghost did exactly that. Without warning, the armored doors leading into the command room buckled inward and fell. The lights died completely. For a moment, total darkness. Then the emergency lights flickered weakly to life, casting the room in a dim red glow. And there he was. Ghost stepped through the ruined doorway, calm, steady, utterly unarmed. His presence was like a weight, suffocating the air in the room. Every officer froze in place, weapons shaking, terrified even to aim. Hulk alone stepped forward, weapon raised, shouting defiantly that he would not die at the hands of one man. Ghost's reply was quiet but cutting, the kind of statement that would haunt every survivor forever. "You will not die at my hands, General. You will die because you taught me how to do this." With that, Ghost moved. Hulk fired, but the shot missed wildly as Ghost closed the distance in an instant. The assassin's hand snapped out, twisting the weapon away, disarming Hulk before he could even process what had happened. Ghost's other hand struck the general's throat, not a killing blow but a disabling one, dropping him to his knees, choking, gasping for breath. Around them, officers cowered in silence, frozen, unable to comprehend how fast their general had fallen. Ghost crouched beside Hulk, leaning close, speaking so that only the general could hear. "You made this personal long ago. This was never a war for me. This was a reckoning." Then he stood and turned his back, walking away as alarms blared pointlessly throughout the dying base. Hulk slumped forward onto the floor, defeated, broken, humiliated. As Ghost moved back into the shadows, the last thing anyone saw before the lights failed completely was the calm, steady gait of a man who had achieved exactly what he came to do, with no wasted effort, no hesitation. One man was enough. The morning light finally crept over the battered forward base, casting its dull glow over a landscape transformed from an imperial stronghold into a shattered ruin. The silence was thick and heavy, broken only by the occasional crackle of failing machinery or the distant, hollow thud of something collapsing in the wreckage. Hulk sat slumped against the cold metal wall of the command center, eyes glassy, throat bruised, his mind racing to comprehend how it had all fallen apart so completely. Only hours before, this place had been the heart of Galactic Command's planetary occupation, a monument to their dominance. Now it was nothing more than the shell of a dream crushed by the hands of one man. Hulk's officers sat around him, stunned and broken, none daring to meet his gaze. No reinforcements would come. No help was on the way. Every system that should have connected them to their fleet, to the Empire itself, was gone. Cut. Ghost had severed their lifeline so precisely, so thoroughly, that they were already ghosts themselves. Across the compound, soldiers who had survived the night's chaos wandered aimlessly, unsure whether to await orders or run. Ghost had left behind no visible army, no banners, no speech declaring victory. He had simply walked through them like a shadow, dismantled them piece by piece, and left them to confront the ruins of their arrogance. Fear and shame hung in the air thicker than smoke. Some knelt beside destroyed vehicles, unable to reconcile what they had experienced. Others sat motionless, staring at the ground as if answers might reveal themselves there. The myth of galactic superiority had collapsed in a single night. But Ghost was not done. His mission was never to simply destroy their forces or terrify their soldiers. His objective was far more precise. Inside the communications vault deep below the command center, he moved quietly now, working methodically. The data core of the entire galactic campaign resided here. Troop deployments, supply chains, command hierarchies, classified communications between generals and governors, secrets worth more than fleets. Hulk had believed this vault was impenetrable, a final fortress immune to sabotage. Yet Ghost stood inside it, perfectly calm, tools already at work dismantling its defenses. He didn't rush. His fingers moved with practiced precision, bypassing encryptions designed to take entire teams weeks to crack. He moved like a craftsman, methodical and cold. The vault's systems offered no resistance. Every countermeasure they had built was something Ghost had studied before. Every trap they had laid was something he anticipated. Within minutes the core was exposed, humming softly as if unaware of its fate. Ghost inserted a small device, an unassuming object no larger than a hand, and watched as it began its work. The device copied the entire archive silently, without triggering a single alarm. But this was no ordinary theft. As it copied, it also planted a hidden virus, one that would corrupt every backup system and cascade through every node in the Galactic Command's communications network when they next reconnected to their fleet. It would infect the entire sector's data infrastructure in minutes, turning strength into vulnerability. When they tried to recover, they would find nothing but chaos. Every strategy, every deployment, every hidden asset exposed. Earth would have it all. Satisfied, Ghost removed the device and stood silently for a moment. He allowed himself a breath, not a sigh of relief but a moment of stillness, of reflection. This was what he had come for. Hulk himself was a target, yes, but this had always been about more than one general. Ghost's entire operation was designed to cripple an empire's campaign before it could even begin, to send a message that would resonate far beyond this single world. As he ascended from the vault back into the ruined corridors, the few soldiers who remained conscious barely reacted. They knew now that he could not be stopped. They didn't even raise their weapons. Instead they stepped aside, heads bowed, defeated before they could even consider fighting. Ghost walked among them as if invisible, and in a way, he was. To them he was no longer human. He was legend, myth made flesh, a story their grandchildren would tell in hushed tones. Outside, in the yard where banners of Galactic Command still fluttered weakly in the breeze, a small shuttle sat waiting. Ghost approached it without hurry. It had landed itself hours earlier, summoned by an automated beacon Ghost had triggered before he breached the vault. The shuttle's sleek design bore no markings, no flag, no identification. Its only purpose was extraction, silent and discreet. Before boarding, Ghost paused at the base's main gate, the gate he had breached only hours before. He pulled a single object from his belt, a battered old combat knife, the same one he had used to mark his presence throughout the campaign. With steady hands he drove the blade into the steel frame of the gate, burying it deep so that no one could miss it. Hanging from the hilt was a small tag, plain but written in perfect galactic script: "One man is enough." In orbit, aboard the galactic flagship, the bridge was a scene of controlled panic. Officers rushed between consoles, shouting over one another as they tried to piece together the situation on the surface. Communications from the forward base had gone completely silent hours earlier. Drone relays were dead. Scout ships dispatched to investigate found only interference and jamming fields. No one could explain how the most advanced occupation force in the sector had lost contact with their own command center overnight. General Hulk's status was unknown. Every effort to re-establish a link failed. And then, as the officers scrambled for answers, their own bridge displays flickered. One by one, consoles froze and rebooted themselves, then displayed a simple message. It was the same message Ghost had left behind on the gate, transmitted across every system, every screen, every device on the flagship and every ship in the fleet. One man is enough. The admiral aboard the flagship froze as the words stared back at him from every display. He didn't speak. He didn't issue orders. He simply sat back in his chair, realization dawning on him too late. Earth had sent no army because Earth had calculated that an army wasn't necessary. They had sent Ghost. A single man who operated outside their understanding, outside their rules, outside their arrogance. The Galactic fleet sat in orbit, paralyzed, humiliated, their entire invasion force shattered not by battle but by precision. Ghost sat quietly in the shuttle as it lifted from the ruined planet, ascending through the atmosphere without challenge, without escort, without a shot fired. His mission was over. The data core sat in a secure case at his feet. His work complete, he allowed himself one final glance down at the world below, the base now little more than wreckage and shame. No soldiers chased him. No gunships pursued. There was no one left with the will to resist. As the shuttle slipped into the void, leaving the Galactic fleet hovering above the world they no longer controlled, one fact became unshakable truth. Earth's response had been perfectly measured, perfectly executed. One man had been enough. The shuttle glided effortlessly through the atmosphere, its silent engines humming as it cleared the last wisps of cloud and broke into the cold emptiness of space. Ghost sat alone in its cabin, his eyes half closed but his mind perfectly alert, cataloging every detail of the mission's success. No alarms sounded behind him, no pursuit ships locked on, no comm channels blared desperate orders to intercept. The entire Galactic fleet sat frozen in orbit, their communications corrupted, their leadership paralyzed, their confidence obliterated. For all their technology and pride, they had been defeated by precision, patience, and by a man who knew exactly how to make them collapse under the weight of their own arrogance. Ghost did not need to savor the victory. The outcome had never been in doubt for him. He simply verified that every step he had calculated had worked exactly as intended. Down on the planet, the shattered remnants of the Galactic garrison remained in place, unable to move, unable to reorganize. Their commanders had either fled or fallen into despair. Their communications were still dead. Their drone fleets littered the ground, broken and useless. Their forward operating base, once a symbol of dominance, was now a husk haunted by silence. Among the surviving soldiers, a strange mood had taken hold. They no longer discussed fighting back. They no longer believed in victory. They sat quietly among the ruins, looking at one another with hollow eyes, knowing that they would be remembered not as conquerors but as a cautionary tale. For the rest of their lives, if they lived long enough to return home, they would carry the shame of this defeat. It would define them more deeply than any past campaign or future order. In the Galactic War Council's inner sanctum many sectors away, word of the disaster began to spread. At first, the reports were fragmented and confused, officers hesitant to relay what they could not understand. How could one man dismantle an entire planetary occupation overnight? How could one human, older than the average galactic recruit, without an army, without artillery, without starships, have reduced an entire fleet's worth of preparation into nothing but wreckage and humiliation? As the corrupted files from the stolen data core began to seep into the Council's encrypted archives, panic spread quickly. It was no longer about a single failed mission on a remote planet. It was about the breach of security itself. The virus Ghost had planted worked perfectly, ensuring that every communication, every classified plan, every secret was now visible to Earth's intelligence networks. Earth had never needed to send an army because the real war had been for information and psychological dominance. And Ghost had won both without firing a single shot at their fleet. Admirals argued in raised voices, blaming one another, demanding to know who had approved the occupation plan, who had underestimated Earth's capabilities, who had allowed a single human to infiltrate their most secure positions. But no one had answers that made sense. The record showed only one clear, undeniable fact: Earth had sent a retired asset, one who no longer held any formal rank or position, and that man had undone an empire's entire forward strategy with nothing but his skill and his mind. His name did not appear in their military databases. His methods did not conform to any known doctrine. He was an anomaly. And the most terrifying thing about anomalies was that they could not be predicted or countered. On Earth itself, far away from the ruined battlefield, a single secure room deep beneath the surface hummed quietly as intelligence officers received the full contents of the stolen data core. No speeches were given, no celebrations staged. This operation had never been about glory. It had been about control. About sending a message. The officers worked silently as the files poured in, decrypted perfectly thanks to Ghost's work, providing them with the deepest secrets of an enemy who until now had considered itself untouchable. The men and women in that room would spend the next weeks analyzing, preparing, adapting Earth's defenses and future moves based on this trove. Ghost had delivered them more than a victory. He had delivered them leverage, and leverage mattered far more than any battlefield win. In a quiet corner of that same secure facility, Ghost stepped off the shuttle without fanfare. No applause greeted him. No medals awaited. There was only a single official standing there, a man with a file in his hand who gave a curt nod as Ghost passed, understanding without needing to speak that the mission had been completed precisely as intended. Ghost walked down the dim hallway with the same calm, unhurried steps that had carried him through the ruined outposts and ambushed patrols. His work was done, and yet he felt none of the satisfaction that others might have expected. Satisfaction required ego. Ghost operated without ego. Every action he had taken had been calculated to achieve one purpose: to eliminate a threat before it could metastasize into war. He left the facility quietly, disappearing into the landscape of Earth itself, just another figure in a crowded world. No one recognized him. No one even gave him a second glance. But far above, across the stars, his name would now echo in the minds of every galactic officer who had witnessed or learned of what had happened. To them, he would never again be just a man. He would be the embodiment of Earth's warning, a legend whispered in strategy rooms and briefing halls, an example of what could happen when arrogance went unchallenged. Back in orbit around the ruined planet, the Galactic fleet finally began its withdrawal. The admiral in command gave the order reluctantly, his shoulders heavy with shame. There would be no attempt to retake the base. No desperate last strike to salvage pride. The defeat had been too total, the humiliation too deep. As the massive ships turned away from the planet's orbit, the officers aboard avoided meeting one another's eyes. No one dared to speak aloud the words everyone was thinking. Earth had proven something undeniable. One man had been enough to defeat them. And if Earth had chosen to send another, or 100 more, what hope would they have then? The message Ghost had left behind would outlive him. On walls and gates, on corrupted consoles and abandoned outposts, his simple statement would remain etched long after the last soldier left: one man is enough. The soldiers who survived would repeat it to each other in barracks and mess halls, trying to understand it but never truly grasping how complete their defeat had been. The officers who returned to Galactic headquarters would speak of him only in whispers, careful never to admit just how thoroughly he had outmaneuvered them. And somewhere on Earth, Ghost faded back into the obscurity from which he had emerged, knowing that his presence alone had been the weapon Earth needed most. His mission had ended as it had begun, without spectacle, without glory, and without a trace of waste. No monuments would be built in his honor, no history books would record the details, and no medals would weigh down his chest. But every galactic officer who had witnessed the collapse of their mighty campaign would remember. They would remember the single battered shuttle, the single human who walked out of its wreckage, and the cold, terrible truth he had proven. One man was enough.